Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and tonight I am here just to help you relax, to drift off to sleep by the sound of the waves, like the whispers of old souls. I know you have come to this video not just to hear the story, but also to find a deep, peaceful sleep. But before we begin, please gently like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to tell you strange stories under the dim moonlight. Where are you from? And what time is it where you live? Just relax. Let your body relax. Put all your worries down by your pillow. Let me take you into a world of mysteries where the wind and the waves mingle, and unsolved mysteries are waiting to be told. Are you ready? Call of the Marrow. Having loaded ice chests full of freshly caught crab into the back of his muddy 4x4, secured his 16-foot red and white Orkney strikeliner to the trailer attached to the vehicle, and returned to the pier to retrieve the nylon mesh crab pots left behind, Miles Burke caught sight of something bobbing in the water, an object he hadn't noticed there before. He recognized it at once as an old-style lobster pot, its slats covered in thick brown seaweed, its netting encrusted with barnacles. Mud and silt clung to its frame, and plant matter dangled from its corners, as though it had been buried at the bottom of the creek for decades. He was confused at first about where it could have come from, but then remembered the trouble he'd had hauling up the last of his pots. It had gotten snagged on something at the bottom of the creek, and he'd struggled to yank it loose. Maybe this Pirates of the Caribbean type relic had come loose too, then drifted ashore in the wake of his boat's churning engine. Whatever the case, he shrugged it off as insignificant following his initial fascination and busied himself stowing the rest of his gear. Someone else could discover it, a local fisherman or curious child. It would make their day and give them something to talk about in this sleepy, coastal town. His eyes kept flicking to it as he worked, however, a curiosity growing that couldn't be quelled. It was probably nothing, but if the cage was as old as it looked, it could be of value. This notion nagged at him. So after depositing his cleaned and empty crab pots in the belly of the boat, he returned with a long-handled ice hook and used it to fish the cage out of the foam. It was cold and wet, slimy to the touch, but that didn't bother him. Hitching the hook to his belt, he turned the cage this way and that, confirming it was vintage, made of wooden slats, rope netting, and leather hinges. He identified the location of its circular trapdoor, but was unable to access it due to the dense accumulation of muck clogging it up. Now it was in his hands. He decided it couldn't be as ancient as he'd thought. The wood didn't smell or feel rotten. It had clearly been in the water a long time, and there was something inside. He could hear it slosh about when he shook it, but he couldn't find a chink in its algae armor to see what. Curiosity mounting, he held the cage tight against his chest and plunged the fingers of his free hand into the kelp. The fronds felt rubbery, springy, and refused to come away, instead seeming to hug the pot tighter. After a few moments, Miles became frustrated and glared at the brown stuff in annoyance. This was not how seaweed worked. The seagulls overhead seemed to agree. Circling restlessly, their shrill cries grew louder, more obnoxious, as though urging him to get the cage open and reveal its contents, or abandon it and leave it where it belonged. He winced beneath their barks, resisting the urge to tell them to shut up. Voices reached his ears, and he turned to see a pair of wizened old fogies in tweed flat caps and woolen jumpers making their way down towards the pier. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, so he hurried to the Land Rover, returning the ice hook to the boat as he passed. The cage was his now, as was whatever was within. and he didn't want to explain himself to locals. Placing the cage like a slumbering infant on the newspaper that occupied the passenger seat, he pulled his door shut and started the engine. Out of habit, he tapped the screen of his phone, which was clutched in the arms of a holder secured to the windscreen. 6 missed calls, 6 more on top of the 5 that morning. He didn't have to check to know they were from his wife, his father, his solicitor, all wanting to know where he was, what he was doing, when he was coming back to the circus his life had become. He'd come to Doonbeg to escape it, for one last indulgence of his favorite pastime before the strike liner, his pride and joy, was taken away. One weekend on the water, fishing and hauling up crab, that's all he wanted. A chance to be free before it all fell apart. The noose had been tightening for weeks, finally forcing him to come clean to Kiara about the failed real estate projects he'd been hiding. The multiple mortgages, the unpaid contractors, the suing investors, forced him to admit it all in shame. The coastal resort he'd poured everything into, the one he thought would save his business, had collapsed before it could break ground. He'd stretched too far, betting that demand for luxury condos would return. It hadn't, and now, with every call he ignored, the threats were growing. Bankruptcy, foreclosure, fraud investigations, failure, exposure, humiliation. Tomorrow he'd return his attention to his woes and decide what he was going to do. Tomorrow, or the day after, or maybe the one after that. It wasn't like he had options. He was facing criminal charges and the repossession of his home and belongings. He had no control over any of it. The only thing he had any say left in was his marriage, and even that was slipping further away with each unanswered call. He had no idea what he wanted to do, fight for the love of his life or let her go. He did know one thing: Kiara did not deserve this. She was innocent. She shouldn't have to go down with his ship or be expected to support a man who cheated and lied. A loser, an idiot, an asshole. The last 3 calls had been from her, and she'd now sent 15 texts. He couldn't bring himself to read them, so he swiped the notification screen away, put the car into gear, and started driving. He waved as he passed the old men, a polite gesture, but they only glared, his clean-shaven jaw and sanitized looks marking him an outsider, not someone they needed to acknowledge. Or maybe it wasn't that. Because country folk were generally friendly. Maybe it's that they somehow knew what he'd taken, something from the creek that wasn't his. He shook his head at the guilt creeping over his shoulders, insinuating he was doing something wrong. It didn't make sense, but every glance at the cage deepened the unease in his gut. There was something about it that put him on edge, made him feel that it wasn't his to take, and it filled him with a familiar kind of excitement. "It's just junk," he said aloud, though he couldn't stop thinking about how the seaweed wouldn't come away from the slats and how something mysterious lay within, which was most likely sludge but might be treasure, something that would help with the mess he was in, something that might help Sierra. Driving away from the inlet, following the cliffs towards Doemore and the quiet B&B he'd booked into, he busied himself with fanciful musings of what kind of treasure the cage might hold. The undulating sea dominating the horizon to his right, gently rising slopes carpeted by fields of purple orchids on his left. It was a magnificent day, all azure skies, cotton wool clouds, and the scent of salty sea spray in the air. He couldn't have asked for more. It was exactly the calm he needed before the storm clouds over his life unleashed their fury. The drive to Ayrton House took 20 minutes, and soon he was maneuvering his vehicle, boat and all, onto the gravel-covered parking lot at the side of the stone-clad building. He was the only guest that weekend, so space for his car and trailer wasn't a problem. He took his phone, the harbinger of inescapable doom, and climbed out, swinging around to the passenger side to reclaim the cage. He took time to wrap it in paper so it wouldn't make a mess when he went in, then crunched across the gravel to the door. He was eager to attack it with his knife, cut away the seaweed, and get inside, so he was hoping not to bump into the proprietor, a lovely old dear named Mary Shaw, who could talk like there would never be a tomorrow. He wasn't lucky. "Ah, there you are," Mary said, shuffling from the dining room as he entered the hall, a bright smile on rosy cheeks, dead carnations clutched in pudgy hands. "Nice day for it. Catch anything interesting?" "Not really. I was only after crab today. You can have some if you like. I'm only going to drop it at the market." He kept moving, casting her the briefest of smiles as he made his way to the stairs and started up. "That would be lovely. My Trevor used to catch crab every weekend, before he fecked off to Australia with that floozy. I was telling you about her, wasn't I? Her and her 10 ex-boyfriends, and my Trevor to be number 11 because he couldn't resist her charms. What's that you have there?" He was on the 5th step when she spotted it, and he checked to make sure he hadn't dripped dirt on her carpet. "Just an old lobster pot. Found it at the pier. It's ancient, but might be worth something if I clean it up. People will buy anything these days." "Dunmore Pier?" Mary suddenly looked troubled, and the smile had fallen from her lips. "What do you mean, found it?" "Just what I said," Miles replied, caught off guard by her change in demeanor and questions. "I think it was buried in the creek. I must have dislodged it." At the foot of the stairs, Mary creased her brow. "That might not be good, Mr. Burke. There's terrible legends associated with that place. A lot of people have been drawn to their deaths there over the years. It's a dangerous place. Haunted, some say. Or worse." "Worse?" "I don't like to talk about it. Gives me the heebie-jeebies, and it sounds ridiculous. Don't laugh now, but some say the bay is cursed. Some say it's home to the Kumara, the hound of the sea, the Marrow." "The Marrow?" Miles shook his head to indicate he'd never heard of such a thing, then resumed his climb to the landing. "Merman," Mrs. Shaw elaborated, eyes wide under a mop of gray curls as she started after him. "You know, like a mermaid, but a man. I know it sounds ridiculous, but some believe it. There are stories of it making off with the souls of the tormented who drowned or jumped from the cliff. They say it keeps their spirits locked in cages, which it hoards like jewels at the bottom of the bay." Her wide eyes were locked on the paper-wrapped cage, one hand on the banister as she climbed, the other crushing the stems of dead flowers. "That's a new one," Miles chuckled, reaching the top of the stairs. "Never knew we were supposed to have mermaids in Ireland, along with banshees and leprechauns. We've some amount of fairy tales, don't we? Don't get me wrong, Mr. Burke. I'm not a believer in such things." She'd stopped halfway up to catch her breath, but continued to stare as he crossed to his bedroom door. "But at the same time, you can't be sure, can you?" "You can't," Miles said, fishing in a pocket for his key. "That could be one of them. A soul cage, one of the Kumaras." "Hardly," he scoffed, guiding the key into the keyhole. He could hear her coming up the stairs again behind him, feel her eyes boring into his skull. "But it's a great story, and it might help sell the thing, if it doesn't fall apart when I take off the kelp." The key turned, the lock disengaged. He opened the door. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Burke. If the legends are true, it's troubled souls the Kumara craves, wayward souls trying to escape. Sorry, Mrs. Shaw. I'm exhausted, so I'm going to grab a shower and take a nap. I might stay another night. I'll let you know this evening. Oh, and I'll bring you that crab. Hopefully it's as good as what Trevor used to catch. I'd put that back, Mary went on as he shut the door. Back where you found it, if you know what's good for you. Fuck's sake, he muttered under his breath as the door clicked shut, then rested against it and braced for more. When he heard her slippered feet slogging back down the stairs, he relaxed, placing the mucky cage on his bed and spreading out the newspaper beneath it. Jesus, mermen and soul cages. I've heard it all now. Better not be a box of bloody souls. I need something good. His heart was pounding, and he had that feeling again, that nervous exhilaration he got when doing something he shouldn't. He still couldn't explain why he felt it. He wasn't gambling with his and Ciara's future, wasn't siphoning non-existent funds from account to account or cooking books. He was just messing with some shit he'd found in the surf. It was no big deal, at all. But he still felt the need to take the edge off, so he went to his suitcase for the small paper package containing a Ziploc bag of white powder, a well-used €50 note, and half an old credit card, then spent the next few minutes at the dresser sorting it out. Once satisfied, and having wiped some residue from his nose, he took the Swiss Army knife Ciara had given him for Christmas from a cargo pants pocket and prized out its largest blade. For the man who has everything, he recalled her saying, and tears welled unbidden in his eyes. He'd had everything and never deserved it, never deserved her. He couldn't redeem himself now, even if the cage contained diamonds. But if he could make things right for her, that would give these last squandered years of his life some kind of meaning. And so, with a sharp inhalation, he knelt at the foot of the bed and started to saw. Almost immediately, he noticed it wasn't working. No matter how much he slashed, the seaweed refused to come away. He could see the blade slicing through fronds, watched them sever with his own eyes, but the slimy substance clung to the cage and refused to tear free. What the hell? He went at it harder, tightening his grip on the knife, jabbing its blade into the gelatinous sludge, stabbing, carving. What is this? And then the blade got jammed, and the knife's handle jerked out of his hand. Damn it, he said, wiping a sweaty palm on his muddy pants before reaching to take back the knife, only to see it get sucked into the seaweed and disappear. What? It was sudden and noiseless, a subtle, casual motion that seemed almost normal. Miles moved his face closer, squinted to peer through the mulch, couldn't see in. You're having a laugh. He sighed and poked his fingers into the mush where the knife disappeared. He couldn't feel it. He wriggled his fingers in further. The seaweed seemed to loosen around his hand. He twisted his wrist, and his fingers and thumb slipped inside. The seaweed seemed to shrivel up and tighten. His fingers got a hold of something solid. Then something solid got a hold of him, clamping around his hand and squeezing tight. Miles Burke, a voice seemed to issue from within. Ah! Miles cried, hugging the cage to his chest and hopping to his feet. The thing on the inside pulled, and his hand slipped in up to the wrist. Miles Burke. Jesus. A strange sensation, like aggressive pins and needles, swept through him, starting in his hand and spreading fast, up into his arm, shoulder, face. Get off. He maneuvered the cage with the arm it was stuck on, held it against his side with the other. He pulled, he tugged, He staggered around the room as he struggled, yelled, and pitched forward when he felt something bite. He crashed into a wall, lifted his head, let his terrified gaze peer into a mirror. The face staring back wasn't his. Fear gripped his chest and he screamed, falling away from the monstrous visage, all doughy gray flesh, mossy green hair, pig-like eyes, and moldy teeth. "Give it to me," Miles could have sworn he heard it say, before he tripped and fell back, cracking his head on the corner of the dresser and coming to rest on the floor. He dreamt then, a dream like no other, a strange collection of images and sounds that made no sense, of him lying motionless on the ground, blood painting a pool around his head, of Mary Shaw entering the room, of policemen covering him with a sheet and collecting powdery evidence, of Mary driving, walking, standing at the edge of the bay, whispering into the cage, saying, "I warned you." Your tortured soul called out, and the marrow called back. Of the cage being cast into the sea, of the dark, murky depths of a jet-black ocean, of the pig-eyed Kumara slithering from the depths to claim its prize, its cage now home to a fresh soul gleaming with torment, a treasure to be savored for eternity. October surprise. Oi Choi, show me your tongue. That's what you got to say to a suspected serp. They can't hide their forked tongues even if they've gotten better at copying just about everything else. Ask anyone, and they'll tell you. I mean, it was all over the feeds, this little old man. He could have been anybody's grandpa, except he was living under a stolen ID and preying on small critters near a school zone. But luckily, some Final Front guys caught him, and when they backed him into a corner, out came that freaky serp tongue. And that's just one example. Who knows how many more are living among us? But we're not going to sit idly by and let it happen. Sometimes all it takes is a few good men to make a difference. That's why I answered the private invite on my holo. Want to do something about the serps? That flashed once, then gave the when and where before the letters scrambled and dissolved. It was fast, like 3 seconds, probably to test our memories and observational skills. We're meeting at the shuttered Lindbergh Library in a part of Southside Apex that hugs the wall along the stretch. And I get there way before sundown to show them I know how to do recon. I'm wearing my urban camo and blending in with a piece of plasteel that hasn't been added to the wall yet. I count 4 guys go into the alley behind the library. Not a one sees me, but I'm not following until it's time, because I'm precise that way. Oi Choi. Some guy I didn't see go and sticks his head out the alleyway. His head is like a crete block with 2 slits, and those slits are looking right at me. I stiffen because maybe he's going to disrespect me and ask to see my tongue, but he just jerks his big head to tell me to get moving. In the alley, he rolls aside a dumpster to reveal a hole. I see his black shirt and the crossed hammers over stars and bars on his forearm. That means he's Final Front, so I know I can trust him. We walk down to the library basement where floodlights and empty shelves line the wall. The 4 other guys are down there, plus 2 Final Front guardsmen and some cyberpunk chick fiddling with a gunmetal box on a fold-out table. When they jam our feeds and make us hand over our holos, I know this is some alpha code red shit, and we're in it for real. Outstanding. The guy with the big head kicks aside some books that got burned after everyone realized the feeds were better, then stands in front of us. Everyone straightens up without being told. "You can call me Sergeant Bill, but don't you dare call me sir," he says, kind of cool and strict at the same time. "Now, you may not know us personally, but we know you. Every one of you has been carefully selected, but if you don't agree, if you have any doubts, then there's the door. No? Then let's begin. You men have been selected to infiltrate the SERPs and reveal the enemy within. My heart hammers in my ears, then skips a beat when Sergeant Bill says the mission pays double time with a bonus for each SERP we expose. Wow, Choi. I mean, I do it for free because I love Apex City. But the double time pay with bonuses is how I know Chancellor Ike must have our back on this mission. He's generous and understands the working man like that. It's like Chancellor Ike's in this basement with us, but we can't say his name. I mean, we can, but no one does out of respect. He's already doing so much while the Weepsters and SERP deniers attack him from all sides, so we can't say his name without giving him something else to deal with. Now, you might ask yourself, what about training? Sergeant Bill says, there'll be none of that. Training will give you away in this scenario. That makes sense. SERPs are trying to be just like us, so they won't know the difference if we be ourselves. Sergeant Bill continues on and takes the words right out of my mouth. I nod and see others doing the same. We all get it, even though none of us knows each other. I bet Chancellor Ike planned it that way through the final front. He's holding a rally all the way on the other side of Apex tonight. That's smart. Plausible deniability to keep us all safe. I watch the Sarge talk and know we're tuned into the same frequency. Choi's a badass. I bet if the basement ceiling caved in, he'd be able to stop it with his head. He's solid as a post, and I bet he's seen some shit. That makes me feel better about how easily he spotted me outside. I imagine already being out in the field and passing him in the street while I'm undercover. We won't so much as look at each other because we're professionals, but we'll both know that we're part of an unspoken brotherhood. There will be no medals for me because I can't talk about what I do, not even to my wife when I have one. She'll respect that I don't talk. Maybe I'll even meet my future wife on a mission. I glance at the cyberpunk chick still messing with the box on the table. She's actually kind of hot. Then, the basement gets pretty quiet. Sergeant Bill is looking at us like he expects someone to say something. One of the other guys, a redhead with too many freckles, raises his hand. What if the SERPs want us to eat someone's cat, sir? What did you call me? Sergeant? Anyone here want to help him out with that question? You eat the damn cat, I say. What did you say? The Sarge gets in my face, but I stare straight ahead and repeat it. Did you hear that? He asks cat question guy. Then Sarge repeats my words like he's in awe. Even better, he gets all of the other guys to repeat it. Yeah, Choi, I was made for this. Then we get serious. Sergeant Bill says we all got to make a temporary sacrifice. I guess we all knew it was coming, but it's still hard to hear it. We're all going to have to get SERP tongues before going out into the stretch. Cat question guy looks at me, maybe hoping I'll speak up and give him an excuse to chicken out. Nope, not gonna happen. We stand there in silence until the moment's gone. Sarge tells us we'll get out normal tongues back once the mission's done. Then he drops some inside knowledge that we didn't know. The SERPs don't talk when they're alone among their own kind because they're not advanced enough to have their own language. They only know how to copy. We trust you, but we can't have you slipping up and talking when you make first contact out in the stretch. For that reason, you're going to have to get your vocal cords paralyzed. Sounds worse than it really is, and it's even more temporary than the tongue mods. No reversal needed. Now, if you go see that lovely lady over there, she'll get you sorted. Any volunteers? I double time it over to the cyberpunk chick because I don't want any of the other guys making a first impression before I do. She's wearing blackout contact lenses, so it's like I'm staring into her soul when she looks up at me. Hey, so it's really simple. You put you face in there. She rotates the gunmetal box my way. The top and side facing me are open, and the inside is white foam with a face-shaped hole. Then you stick your tongue in there. She points to a black hole that lines up with the mouth of the white face hole. There's something down there, something with metal legs. Having second thoughts, it only hurts for a second. It's nothing compared to this. She opens her mouth and shows me her tongue stud. I run my eyes over her metal, leather, and tattoos to let her know fear is the farthest thing from my mind right now. I don't know. Will I still be able to do this? I do the old 3-leaf clover tongue trick and let her get a good look while the other guys line up behind me. I stare into her designer eyes. Someone behind me coughs, but I keep staring until she gives a slow smile. Then I put my face in the box. She puts her hand on the back of my head and strokes my hair. We'll probably tell our kids about this moment. She's right. It's quick, more like a millisecond, an intense burst like a laser slicing my head down the middle. But then it's gone, and whatever's in that hole sprays something icy and soothing into my throat. Her hand stops stroking my hair, and I take my head out of the box. Another, heavier hand lands on my shoulder before I can get her hollow. It's Sergeant Bill, and he's guiding me back up the basement stairs while I blink away the white spots in my vision. "Let's check you out here, soldier," he says when we're next to the hole that leads back out into the alleyway. It's dark now, so he pulls out a pen light and a hand mirror to give me a look. "Oi choy." I try to say it, but my new tongue just flaps around. That's when I remember about the frozen vocal cords. Sarge plays it cool and gives me a moment to fight down the panic. I take another look. There's not even a speck of blood, and a serp's tongue isn't like a snake's tongue. It's more like 2 smaller human tongues that can move in different directions. If I hold it still, I can barely tell the difference. Sarge is right. It'll be easy to reverse. I close my mouth and look at him. "Congratulations. You're first out in the field, but we have a special surprise before your stretch deployment. We couldn't tell you until you reach this stage, but you get to meet him. Tonight. Chancellor Ike." He doesn't have to say the name. As he gives me the details of how I'll get to the rally and what happens after, my eyes start to tear up. I clear my throat, but even that doesn't make a sound. "Hey, you know how to use one of these?" Sergeant Bill asks as I'm about to leave. He hands me something that feels light and solid at the same time. "That's a ghost gun, undetectable and 3D printed to match the color of your skin. You get just the one shot, but you might need it if things go sideways with the serps. Keep it close." "All right, soldier. I'll leave you to it." He shakes my hand before going back to the basement. Even if I could talk, I wouldn't have the words. The risk Chancellor Ike is taking for us goes beyond words. He didn't have to, but he did, and he's letting me meet him with a loaded weapon on my person. That's what makes him great. His ability to completely trust someone in a world filled with lies. I take a steadying breath, then remind myself to breathe only through my nose from here on out to keep my serp tongue hidden. The cruiser is already waiting there in the alley, just like Sergeant Bill said it would be. Nothing fancy, but it hovers smoothly enough over the south side's cracked pavement, then picks up speed on the north side's shiny streets where the Weepster elites live in high-rises and pretend that serps aren't flooding our city with sacromine. The driver doesn't say a word or even look at me. He just hands me my rally ticket and lets me off a few blocks from the Apex arena. I show my VIP ticket, and the metal detector is quiet like me as I zip through security. At first, I'm a little paranoid about someone trying to start a conversation with me, but it's easy to just clap, nod, and smile with my mouth closed after Chancellor Ike comes out and starts talking. My seat's in row 9, close enough to the stage that I can hear his voice boom before the speakers farther back in the stadium amplify it. He looks even bigger in real life. He makes this packed stadium feel small. And it's not like I think he's a god. I know he's not perfect, and he'll be the first to say so. But that's why he's our last chance. He's not afraid to say what's on everyone's mind. Then, right in the middle of Chancellor Ike's story about how he made the Weepsters pay their fair share, someone 2 rows ahead of me stands up from his seat. It seems like the wrong time for a standing ovation. Plus, he's facing the wrong way. He climbs on his seat to put himself even higher over the seated crowd. That's when I see it's Cat Question Guy from the basement. One of his eyes is swollen shut, and the other eye is bugging out of his skull, searching the stadium for something behind me. I turn my head to look back and see others doing the same. Chancellor Ike can't help but notice. Sir, do you need assistance? Do you need someone to teach you how to sit? This guy. Look at this wacko. Are you lost? Seats are for sitting, sir. Cat Question Guy starts climbing over the other people to get out of his row. People are recording him on their hollows because that's what people do. Idiot. He's going to compromise the mission. We need some assistance over here. The speakers carry Chancellor Ike's voice across the stadium. Cat Question Guy takes off up the aisle, then runs back toward the stage as security comes down the aisle after him. Oh shit. Does Cat Question Guy also have his own ghost gun? Maybe he's a double agent. Maybe the Serps are smarter than we think. More security is closing in on the stage from both sides, but they'll never get there in time to save Chancellor Ike. I put my hand on the ghost gun in my pocket and get to my feet. But then I see Sergeant Bill at the head of security sprinting down the aisle. Gun! Gun! He's got a gun! Sarge draws his own piece without breaking stride and drops Cat Question Guy with a quick burst to the chest. Everyone around me has dropped to the floor with their hollows hanging overhead to still take in the action. I realize I'm still on my feet. Sergeant Bill glances at me. I look away and start sinking to the floor to keep my cover, but something stops me. He's standing at the end of my row, and those slits in that big block of a head are still trained on me. Now his gun is too. Check the tongue on the one in the aisle, he says, without taking his eyes off me. I think he was signaling this guy. My hand is still frozen on the ghost gun in my pocket, and my words are frozen in a mouth made to betray me. Sarge plants his feet wide and shows me his teeth. Oi choy, let me see that tongue. Venus buried. The girl in the graveyard is your best friend, so you take her home. The night is a bruise between you, a blotch of rogue in the passenger window, the color of fruit left out to fester. The body pries at her seatbelt, a finger, then 2. The radio echoes static, the body shuffles in her seat. You study the face, the similar slice of jaw, the nose humped from where a baseball had hit her at 12, just slightly off center. The skin like a rain-licked plastic bag, the stink of musk and sulfur. You want to look away, but you cannot. She's so beautiful. Even like this, your headlights rake warbled slits through the dirt road, a yellow like jaundice. Your hands are stiff from the cold, your lips cracked. The girl beside you is dead, and you are bringing her home. 4 days ago, you'd stepped into a hardware store and emerged with a shovel sturdy enough to lift a life on. 4 days, you'd spent digging dirt in your own backyard yard until loam muddied under your fingernails and erratic holes split garden beds like the mouths of greedy beasts, until you could sift through soil with your eyes closed, with a hand bound. 4 nights you had laid in your bed staring at the pockmarked ceiling, wondering what it felt like to burn alive. Now, the shovel beats dull against the skin of your trunk, your hands gripping the steering wheel like a throat you're trying to silence. The body turns, dawn bleaching the salmon gray of her skin. The left eye slips from its socket, and she pushes it back in with the heel of her hand. She smiles, head lolling like a marionette's. "Sorry, baby." Her voice comes out strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." In a sickle of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus smiles up at you with shell-pale gums. Adeline Marcus died on the 31st of October and was buried a week later, the date on her gravestone a month shy of her 18th birthday. In the court, the boys would claim it was an accident, that they didn't know she was inside. For better or worse, you believe them. The fingers striking out matchboxes, the beer cans constellating the sidewalk. A prank gone too far. The wrong place, the wrong time. It doesn't have to be on purpose. She didn't have to be home. The coroner ruled it suffocation, but all you can imagine is flame like a stiff palm striking over and over. Adeline had crawled from the mouth of the home on her hands and knees. She was dead by the time she reached the pavement, her Sunday dress singed up to her knees. The dress you knew well enough. Either way, the boys were left with 25 to life, and the Marcuses were left with a dead daughter, a ring of ash like chalk on the pavement. You were left with a misplaced guilt like hunger, a guilt like an Ouroboros, choking on the tail, swallowing the head, eating yourself alive and being unable to stop, even as it consumes you. Because this wasn't the sort of thing that happened to good people. You watch water curl down your shower drain, carrying with it mortuary makeup, kaleidoscopic insects, and jasmine bubbles. Strings of dirt stretched out like sinew. The body's head rests on her knees, vertebrae needling through her back like a line of molars. The electric lights wash her green, dark veins rooted under brittle skin. She turns her face to the shower head and picks at the powdery sediment under her fingernails. The shower floor is a mess of grit, and you think of a child scooping up the sand. You turn the heat up until it scalds and scrub mildew from the base of the shower door. You think, if you can only get everything clean, everything will be all right. She turns her head and looks at you through eyes obscured by glass paneling. She says, "It's not as bad as all that. I don't even think I felt a thing." But she says it through lips the color of spoiled plums, so the sentiment doesn't ring true. You lift threadbare towels from the bottoms of your linen closet. You walk 3 times around your block and return to a corpse sat on your sofa like she has nowhere better to be. There are ants in your sugar bowl. You try to remove them, lift their crystal-knotted bodies on the prong of a fork, but they slip between the gaps, and you are left with a mess bigger than when you started. Tea-brown sludge bleeding from thoraxes and the stink of vinegar. There's a dead girl on your sofa, but let's focus on the ants in your sugar bowl, the way they thread through cysts of white like veins on a leaf, like the capillaries that run through the skin of your face. You make tea anyway. You add too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the body. She stares at you. You stare back. The two of you drink, and ribbons of watery milk pour clean out her trachea, the gaping hole in her chest. But she doesn't stop drinking until you do. "You're not looking at me," she says. "Not really." "Yes, I am." You twist your hands in the shag carpet. "Aren't I now?" "No," she says. "You're not." You leave your teacup on the floor, saucer and iris of yellow, and go upstairs. You take 2 cigarettes from the carton squashed on your father's desk, and then think better of it. Press down with your heel until tobacco dissipates into the tawny carpet. You change your bedsheets twice, eggshell white, no, gray with peonies. You make a second cup of tea. When you get back to the room, the body is still there. You are looking at her. You are not looking at her. "Do I disgust you?" she says. No. She shakes her head, dark hair plastered to her shoulders like reeds. No more than I always did. "You need to sleep," you say. "Baby." She tilts her head to one side. "Sleeping is all I've ever done." The last time you saw Adeline Marcus alive was in the back of a stranger's car, parked on a stranger street, with the taste of a stranger's tequila fresh between your lips. You were never too built for parties, so the outcome was a pair of girls who looked like they were playing dress-up, blousey dresses with sleeves like a nun's, thrift store necklaces noosing your necks, shoplifted lipstick which she hid beneath her mattress, more wax than pigment. But in the citrus peel of streetlights, in the low trill of distant music, the 2 of you looked beautiful. She had her legs curled under her and was sitting sideways in the back seat, her hand resting on your knee and the other palmed against the window. A song on her lips that you couldn't quite place. You were too close, but it was night, and everyone was inside and drunk. And sometimes we all need to feel closer than we should be, to lose ourselves a little. The song melted on her lips, swallowed into the limp press of salvia and booze, and you said something like, "I think I should go home now." And she said something like, "Have another drink." And so you did. You let her pour the liquor into the flimsy mouths of red plastic cups and watched her swallow. She said, "You're so pretty." And you said, "I think you should stop." And she said, "Just let me say that one thing." And you wanted to say, "Stop fucking looking at me like that." And you wanted to say, "I want to crawl inside you and make a life for myself in the city of your mind." And you wanted to say, "Let's just be quiet. Let's just not talk. Let's just not ruin a good thing by telling the truth." Instead, you pushed open the passenger door, stumbled out onto the skin of vein blue sidewalk. "I'm going home now." The body lays with her back to your bed, hands worming in the floral sheets, chestnut hair spilling across her throat, past the ballpoint pen-marred bedposts, over the gray skin of her forehead. You are thinking about the silken mouth of a coffin. You are thinking of how she looked when you pulled her from the rose mouth of heaven. The radiator hums. A lace curtain bellies your open window. She rolls over onto her side, slots her hands together like pieces of a decaying jigsaw puzzle. "You still can't even look at me." Her mouth moves too slowly, words like chewing gum. "Why am I here, Bet?" "What's it for?" There are pink crescent moons on the bed of your palms from the bite of your nails. She pulls her knees to her chest and a bone cracks. She pulls her knees to her chest and a molar tumbles from between her keyhole lips. "You can only love me when I'm not here. You can only love me when there's nothing left to love." You press your cheek to the cool spread of linen beside her. You listen to the steady beat of your heart, the way you can feel it in your fingertips, entirely singular. "Don't tell anyone," you say. "Did you want it to die with me, Bet?" She shifts and her hair falls against the nape of your neck. "Were you glad it was silenced?" "Don't tell anyone," you say again. She sighs. lays herself back down so you're face to face. Crooked nose, eye pulling from its socket, the onset of gray-green decay wreathing her jaw. The smell of soil and rot and cicada-heavy nighttime. Who could I tell? She brushes your hand. I'm not really here. And suddenly you can imagine it is your fists splitting beer cans in two like overripe fruit. It is your fingers on the matchbox, your fingers striking out. But you both know the house would still be on fire, and you both know you'd leave alone. You take her hand. You put your face in the crook of her neck and beg forgiveness from a ghost, noises from the wardrobe. I was crying when Mummy came to tuck me in for the night. Come on, Jamie, my love, dry those tears away. And please, let's not have any more of that silly nonsense about monsters in your wardrobe again tonight, she whispered, stroking my cheek. You know how cross Bill gets about it. Bill, my stepfather, a horrid man, always shouting at me for one thing or another. How I wish he and Mummy had never met. It was only since he had come to live with us that the scary noises had begun. But they are real, Mummy, I swear to you. I hear them. She sighed and stood up, padded over to the wardrobe and opened the door, revealing a small closet packed with my clothes on hangers, which she shuffled from side to side. See, sweetheart, only your clothes in here. There's nothing at all to be frightened of now, is there? I swallowed as hard as I could and managed a tiny little shake of my head. Bill stood watching at the door. He narrowed his eyes, giving me one of his mean sideways looks, and told me that if I disturbed them again that night, I would have to stay inside my room the whole of the following day. Mummy was watching me, so she didn't see the expression in his eyes. He never does it when she's looking. She smiled, kissed me again, and walked over to him. Look, we'll leave your nightlight on for you, my darling, she said. Good night now. It was my shivering that woke me. It was exactly 3 o'clock. I am sure of that because I heard our grandfather clock in the hall downstairs chime 3 times. I was ice cold. My duvet had tumbled to the floor and my fingers and toes felt numb. Outside it was ever so windy and raindrops were hammering against the window pane. I liked to keep my curtains open so I could see the man in the moon when he smiled at me. That night, though, I couldn't see him at all. The clouds were hiding him from me. I reached down for my duvet and wrapped it around me, blowing on my fingers to warm them up. That's when I heard it, the rattling of someone fiddling with the wardrobe doorknob. I longed to shout for Mummy, but I knew Bill would be angry if I disturbed them. Instead, I slowly pulled the pillow over my head and tried my best not to listen, but it was no use. Then came a familiar sound. My wardrobe door always creaked when you opened it slowly. I could tell that it was edging open, little by little. You couldn't mistake those short staccato creaks as the door jerked. It had to be the monster, and tonight it was coming out to get me. Normally it stayed inside the wardrobe. My heart began hammering in my ears so loudly, I remember being terrified that it would hear. Curling myself into a ball as tightly as I possibly could, I squeezed my eyes shut and bit down on my lip to stop myself from crying out loud. I remember tasting the blood as it trickled into my mouth, but I still didn't dare move an inch. Eventually, the door stopped moving, and I heard a shuffling of something brushing against wood. Peeping through my fingers, I was just about able to make out a human shape in the dim glow of my nightlight. A smallish figure was standing at the bottom of my bed, staring at me. I could hardly believe it. The monster was no bigger than me. But the thing was, it was pure evil. I just knew. I think that was when I wet the bed in terror. I couldn't help myself. but I couldn't let it know. I remember the sensation of warm liquid spreading down my legs and hoping that if I simply refused to budge, the horrid monster might not find out. Maybe if I recited the Lord's Prayer to myself, it would go away and leave me alone. It stayed there, watching me for ages, whilst I prayed with all my heart for it not to hurt me. Eventually it hissed, "It's time!" Then it stomped over to my door, cracked it open, and slipped out onto the landing. When I heard it knocking on my parents' bedroom door, I almost had heart failure. My stepfather would be furious. It hammered on the door again, and then I heard Bill groan and ask in his cross voice what the hell I thought I was up to. Suddenly, their bedroom door crashed open and slammed against the wall. What I heard in the next few seconds were the worst sounds I had ever heard in my entire life. First, there was a scuffling, and I heard Bill swear out loud. After that, there were lots of heavy crashes, followed by a kind of gurgling and a piercing shriek that sounded like Mummy's voice. Afterwards, I heard her screaming, and screaming. There were more bangs, then a few resounding thuds and weird moaning noises. And still, the screaming didn't stop. What could I do? I wanted to run and help Mummy, but how could I? Paralyzed by fear, I jammed my fingers hard into my ears to block out her screams. After what seemed like ages, there was silence. Utter silence. Not a sound. I tell you, that deafening silence was 10 times worse than the screaming. I then watched, horrified and open-mouthed, as the monster crept stealthily past my bed without so much as a single glance in my direction, wrenched the wardrobe door open, and stepped inside. It wasn't until it had pulled the door firmly shut with a click that I felt able to move. My pajama bottoms were still soaking wet, and now they felt yucky and cold, but I didn't even care. I jumped up and shot out of my room to see what the monster had done. It had hurt Mummy, I was certain. I had to help her. I spotted Bill first. He lay sprawled face down in the entrance to their bedroom. I didn't care two hoots about Bill, but where was Mummy? I needed to find Mummy. I leaped over the motionless form that had been my stepfather and slipped to my knees in a dark red, sticky puddle of gooey stuff, slowly expanding across the parquet from underneath his head. It was gross. I wiped my hands clean on my pajamas as I struggled to my feet and gazed around. The room looked like a scene from one of those scary murder movies Bill liked to watch on the TV. There she was. My dear mother was slumped sideways, half in, half out of the bed. Her frilly white nightdress was crimson. Her beautiful hazel eyes were wide open, still full of shock, her mouth gaping in a now silent scream. A huge kitchen knife protruded from her throat. I recognized it. It was the sharp, shiny one from the back of the kitchen drawer, the one Bill always used to carve the lamb on Sundays. As gently as I could, I gripped the smooth brown handle of the knife and tried to lever it out of her poor, lifeless body, but it was ever so difficult to do. When it finally came free, there was an awful slurping noise, and more blood trickled down her neck. I fell backwards and let the knife drop to the floor. The coppery smell of all that blood was suddenly overpowering. I think that must have been when I began to scream. I was still screaming when the police broke down the door, having been alerted by Mr. Wilson, our next-door neighbor. I very quickly learned that, just like Mummy and Bill, they didn't believe there was anything or anybody in the wardrobe. Even to this day, nobody believes a word of what I say. It has become unbearably hot in this room. I start to feel skittish and wipe my sweaty palms up and down my jumpsuit legs to prevent my knees from jiggling up and down. It is made of scratchy nylon material. Horrid orange color, too. My jaw clenches tight. Why doesn't anybody believe me, doctor? I whisper through gritted teeth. That's all I can remember. I swear to God I have not invented anything. It is honestly what happened on the night my mother and that man were killed. My hands ball themselves into fists. I have learned this is not considered good behavior, however, so I force myself to uncurl them, finger by finger, and carefully place both my rigid hands, palm down, and fingers outstretched on my lap. Tears are flowing, dripping from my chin to my chest. I let them fall, but they begin to cause the cloth to become clammy, and it sticks to my chest. Feels like blood. God, I can't stand it. My left eye twitches and I begin to rock back and forth. My throat is dry. I feel myself slipping. Dr. Simpson is staring at me. All right, James. I think that is more than enough for today, he says, removing his spectacles and placing them with his pen and pad on the small table at his side. You've done well. This is fine progress we have made this afternoon. I believe our sessions are finally getting somewhere. He then smiles and reaches for my hand. I'm sweating, shaking, still sobbing. I'm proud of you, James. This is the first time in the 11 years you've been in here with us that you have actually mentioned these sentiments of ambivalence towards your stepfather. It is excellent that you are beginning to admit and evacuate any feelings of pent-up hatred you have been suppressing all this time. He hands me a small plastic cup and presses a button on his pager. Here you go now. Take your meds. Look, the nurse is here to escort you back to your ward. I'll see you for our next session. Same time next week. The Ghost of Old Jeb Brown. Childhood memories of walking home from school on Halloween Day. Cool breezes under overcast skies. The scratching of dried leaves on the pavement as the wind pushed them by. They crunched under my feet and made a swoosh, swoosh sound as I walked through them. When I got home, I raked them up into mounds and cannonballed into them with a splash like crunchy water. My old Labrador retriever with his gray face would find the energy to join in the fun, pouncing on top of me with a vivaciously wagging tail. The neighborhood was always decorated for fall. There was nothing creepy or scary at all. Hay bales and scarecrows peppered the subdivision along with the old, dried-up cornstalks. Every house had a jack-o'-lantern. We'd spread out old newspaper over the table to carve my pumpkin, cutting off the top. I'd scoop out the sticky fruit and separate the seeds. Mom would wash the seeds and salt them up before baking them in the oven, while I cut out triangular eyes, a nose, and a goofy smile with only a few teeth. A candle was always placed in the center, giving the pumpkins a ghoulish glow. Homework was done with haste. A shower was taken early. Dinner was served before dark. My costume was never anything fancy. A plastic character's suit with a hard-to-see-through plastic mask that was held on by a thin rubber band. Yet, I was proud of my costume, excited to be for one night the character I chose, all ruined by an overly concerned mom who demanded I wear a jacket. The streetlights came on and the subdivision filled with kids accompanied by adults. There were vampires and princesses, robots and witches. Some costumes were homemade, some were store-bought, some were extravagant, and some were cheap. None of us kids cared. It was Operation Candy. My parents released me like I was a hungry jackal looking for a carcass to feed from. Mom would always stay home to hand out the candy, while Dad double-timed it to keep up with me as I ran from house to house. The Fambros' house was always a good one. Their mom would dress up as a silly scarecrow, much like the one from The Wizard of Oz, and sit out on the front porch. She would ask us if we wanted a trick or a treat. If you answered trick, she would do cartwheels or sing and dance, something funny to entertain us kids. I'd pick trick just for a laugh. The Bedwells' home was my favorite. On their porch, they had a scarecrow they called Old Jeb Brown. It was made of denim overalls and a red and black plaid flannel shirt stuffed with straw, boots for feet, gloves for hands, and a jack-o'-lantern for the head. Inside the head, they put a speaker. Mr. Bedwell would sit on the couch inside and wait for trick-or-treaters to walk up and then scare them. Even though I knew it was coming, he always managed to scare me. They would always invite us in and tell us the story of Old Jeb Brown. Old Jeb once owned all the land the subdivision was built on. For many years, he lived a reclusive lifestyle on the edge of town. He rarely accepted visitors, and never when they were unannounced. He built a rickety barbed wire fence around his property and posted signs that read, "No trespassing. Violators will be shot on sight." He posted those about every 50 yards or so, according to the story. People, for the most part, took that warning seriously. However, every Halloween, there were those few who would bang on his door and yell trick or treat. Old Jeb would greet them at the door with a rifle in hand. People would go scurrying away. Jeb would always fire a warning shot to let them know to never come back. Late one night, on Halloween, 1953, a group of teens felt it was their place to teach Old Jeb a lesson in politeness. They snuck up his driveway, threw a flaming bag of poo on his porch, banged on the door, and hid. Jeb never woke to put out the flaming bag, and it caught his porch on fire. The teens who were hiding in the shadows ran off. Jeb died in the house fire. Mr. Bedwell went on to tell us that the following Halloween, those kids went missing, and that they weren't the only ones. There have been cases of missing teens on Halloween over the decades. He believes it was the ghost of Old Jeb Brown exacting revenge on bad kids on the anniversary of his death. As a young kid, the story did a good job of scaring me straight. But when I turned 13, it was just a bunch of malarkey. At that age, I hit a growth spurt and was too big to trick or treat. The little things like jumping in the leaves, carving jack-o'-lanterns, and the magic of autumn were lost on me. Frankly, I hated the season because it meant school was well underway. That year, Halloween fell on a Friday, and two of my friends stayed the night at my house. They told me there were other ways to have fun on Halloween than trick-or-treating. We waited until my parents went to bed. We grabbed toilet paper, all the eggs we had, and a couple ball bats. We snuck out of the house late that night. We found a neighbor's house with no lights on and threw toilet paper in their trees, covering it. We then egged their car using half the eggs we had. Then we destroyed their decorations and smashed their mailbox. A light came on in the house, and we took off running, dodging behind another house so we wouldn't get caught. We found it all exhilarating, laughing at our antics. We took a shortcut through the yards to the opposite street, Mr. Bedwell's street. My friends saw Old Jeb the Scarecrow and immediately wanted to ruin it. I told them I didn't want to mess with that house, that I knew the guy, but they didn't want to listen. They started with the toilet paper, just like the last place. Then they moved on to egging the front of his house. My one friend, Jimmy, grabbed a large landscaping stone from Mr. Bedwell's yard and threw it through his bay window. They turned to run, but Jimmy didn't get away. Old Jeb jumped up and grabbed him. Me and my other friend, Ricky, screamed in fright, but were not about to leave our friend. We started hitting the scarecrow with the bats, but the bats didn't faze it. By then, the lights were on in Mr. Bedwell's house. He was furious, but ran outside to help Jimmy. The scarecrow knocked Mr. Bedwell down and ran off with Jimmy. We chased Old Jeb all the way to the graveyard. There, Jimmy started sinking into the ground, and the scarecrow fell into a limp pile of clothes and straw. We grabbed a hold of Jimmy and pulled with all our might, but something stronger was pulling him down. We screamed for him to hold on, but the dirt was rising up over his face. His hands slipped from our grasp, and he was gone. We didn't have time to mourn or dig. The scarecrow stood back up, alive, and stomped towards us with intent. We scrambled to our feet and ran, but not fast enough. Old Jeb caught Ricky and started dragging him down to the grave. I grabbed Ricky in a bear hug, hoping to keep him above the soil, but I started to sink as well. I let go of Ricky and climbed out. I looked at Ricky. I saw terror in his eyes, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to end up like him and Jimmy. I was scared, so I ran, and I didn't look back. When I got home, I quietly snuck back inside and went to my room upstairs. I looked out the window, and there it was staring up at me. I sat on my bed watching it. It never moved. Not until the sun came up and it collapsed into a pile of straw and clothes again. 30 years later, and I still have to lock myself in my house every Halloween night. The ghost of old Jeb Brown sits outside and waits. Bad reflections. I am not a well person. That isn't easy to admit, even though I understand that it is important to acknowledge that as fact. I am convinced that it all started the night of the storm. After the lightning strike and subsequent power surge from the night before, both washing machines at my apartment complex were on the fritz. It was a minor miracle that we had lost power for only a few minutes, and thank God my expensive surge suppressors did their job. As a combined freelance writer/web designer, I rely heavily on my computers for my livelihood, and imagining even one of them electrically fried just makes my cringe. The electric shock that knocked me on my ass was the real highlight of the evening, though. Strong summer evening thunderstorms were nothing new for our small Midwestern city, but this one was particularly impressive. Blinding flashes lit the windows, and booming thunder rolled and rattled the panes every few minutes. Not wanting to rely on the surge devices exclusively, I decided to quit working and power all my equipment down. Reaching down and unplugging the main computer power feed at the critical moment when the lightning-induced surge came through, I actually saw as well as felt the arc as it jumped from the wall outlet, first following the cord, then my hand as I pulled the plug out. It was quite a jolt, knocked me back a few feet and flat onto my back. I don't think I lost consciousness, but my whole body tingled and I smelled an ozone smell for hours afterward. Probably should have gone to the doctor just to get checked, but I'm mid-20s and still have some lingering adolescent male invincibility delusions, so I figured I'd survive and blew it off. Lugging dirty laundry down to the basement had never been one of my favorite pastimes, but add carting it a few blocks' journey through the neighborhood, and you have a whole new level of annoyance. Nonetheless, there I sat the next day, but already in a state of commingled pain and numbness from just a few minutes in the rock-hard, cracked pink plastic chair, a new John Scalzi sci-fi in hand. So far, the background noises of the machines and other patrons, including not one, but two screaming toddlers, had prevented me from successfully reading a single page. A short eternity later, the washer containing my first load quite spinning, and sounded a brief buzz to alert me that it was done. Even though the laundromat was moderately crowded, I was lucky that there was an open dryer just opposite my washer, so I dutifully drug myself out of the torture device, masquerading as a chair, and headed across the room. I bundled a large armful of my socks and tighty-whities, turned and dexterously flipped open the dryer lid, only to receive another shock to my hand. This one thankfully much milder than the one from the night before. It still startled me, though. and I yelled as I dropped my armload of clothes. "Son of a bitch!" A room full of eyes shifted my direction. "Sorry," I mumbled to no one in particular, returning to my chores. After finishing, I returned to my poor man's pink throne, determined to blot out all distractions and read. 5 minutes later, I was vegetating, staring aimlessly about the laundromat. That was when I first saw it. A hole where no hole should be, reflected in the convex glass door of the ancient washing machine directly across the room from where I sat. I thought, at first, it was a smudge, or even a ding in the glass. But then I noticed the same anomaly replicated in the machine door on either side of this one. The more I examined it, the reflected dark spot, if that's what it was, seemed to float behind me, down near the floor. But when I turned to look, there was nothing. Over the next few hours, I washed and dried 3 loads, returning to watch the spot in between each. If I looked closely enough, I thought I could see it moving ever so slightly, sort of swirling and undulating. There was a hypnotic effect to it, so much so that the mother of one of the screaming kids had to poke me to let me know my last load was done. Finally finished, I stuffed my clothes into a couple pillowcases that were serving as laundry bags and staggered blurry-eyed from the building. Once outside, my head somewhat cleared, and interest in my recent temporary fixation began to wane. My focus turned instead to contemplate the work that I was now seriously behind on, thanks to the storm and extended laundry duties, as I headed for home. Walking up the steps to my building, momentarily fumbling for my keys, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the glass windows that outline the main doorway, and I froze. The spot, or whatever the damn thing actually was, had somehow followed me. I stared in confusion. It didn't seem possible, yet there it was unmistakably in the reflection, hovering in the same vicinity behind me and just above the ground, like it had appeared before. I spun my head around, and just like before, there was nothing to be seen behind me. Against my better judgment, I spun my attention back to examine the reflection in the window. The spot was indeed there, but it had changed. While I had been walking home, it had grown larger and had begun to emit flashes of light from its swirling center. Just a speck appearing here and there, briefly shining through before the undulating mass rolled and blotted it out again. And along with the reflection, there was now an accompanying sound, a faint tinkling, like a set of wind chimes, coming from the direction of the spot. Unlike chimes, though, that came and went randomly with the wind, these played a melodic tune. Their cadence captured my attention, the rhythm lulling me into a trance. I listened and I stared. For how long, I couldn't say. With some effort, I pulled my gaze away from the window and the spot, focusing down on my now clenched hands. The chimes cut off cleanly as the spot slipped from my peripheral vision. Fear replaced my confusion. I quickly unlocked the door and hurried inside, my heart pounding out a trip hammer beat. I needed to get to my apartment, but avoid anything reflective along the way. The elevator was out of the question, so I kept my head down and headed for the stairs. The stairway provided temporary safety, with its dingy concrete steps and unadorned walls. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. As I climbed, I began to inventory the hazards that still awaited me. Once inside my own door, there lurked a multitude of windows, pictures, and mirrors, both big and small. TVs, appliances, and even my computers, and all had to be avoided. I reached my door without incident, and took a few moments to calm my nerves. As I waited, I couldn't help questioning the reality of what I thought had just happened. Was I really cowering outside my own door, In the hallway, I had traversed countless times, afraid of seeing some malevolent object in anything reflective. I tried to tell myself that this was foolishness, akin to a kid afraid of the dark for no apparent reason other than it wasn't light. Or was there a better explanation? The shock during the storm. That had to be the cause, I reasoned. Maybe some brain damage, not much, but enough to make me see spots and floating objects that weren't really there, and hear things that weren't there either. Why not? I had not quite, but almost convinced myself that this could all be rationally explained. I still wasn't ready to raise my line of sight above floor level, but I entered the apartment much calmer than I had been only moments before. I thought about the little kid me again, afraid of the dark, and remembered walking through the house turning on all the lights, telling myself that even though I wasn't really afraid, the lights were just a harmless precaution. With that as my mindset, I retrieved a handful of towels and blankets and proceeded through my apartment, covertly covering anything reflective as I went. Collapsing at my desk, having covered my monitors with a sheet, I started theorizing how I could live like this until I could get to a doctor for help. I rationalized, even if the spot wasn't real, I still had to deal with its effects until I could be assured that it was gone. As I was ticking off tasks needed to stay functional, disable monitor screensavers, figure out how to go out in public, maybe wear a hoodie with the strings pulled tight to minimize my field of view, my phone rang. I reflexively reached for it out of habit and had just enough time to register that it was my mom calling before I saw it again, reflected in the dark glass of my cell phone. It floated higher now, and it was still growing, perhaps balloon-sized now. I could see variation in colors, shades of gray to black, swirling and heaving in rippling folds. The flashes of light had increased their brightness, still appearing briefly in the dark mass before being reconsumed. The chimes returned as well, grabbing my attention so completely that answering my mother's call was beyond my capabilities. I watched and listened, unsure whether sight or sound was the more compelling sensation. As my phone ringing stopped, I heard another sound, low and hidden underneath the chimes. There was nothing melodic about this new sound, and it struck a fresh fear into my mind. It resonated wet and heavy, like some ancient Lovecraftian god of old dragging itself from dark, mysterious depths. As I listened, the chimes clashed with the new noise in a strange auditory battle for supremacy. As I watched, the spot slowly grew. I could see it changing in the reflection, but knew it was occurring behind me, and at the same time, knew that there would be nothing there to see if I had been able to turn and look. Rigid with fear, I couldn't look away, helpless to alter my situation. As I sat incapacitated, a fresh horror arose. Like soft tendrils at first, I sensed what felt like a pair of many-fingered hands creep over my shoulders and down my chest. Their caress was almost sensual as they moved down to me waist, where the sensation changed to a grip. There was no real strength in the ghostly hands, but the feeling was inexplicably drawing me backward, back to where the spot awaited. Sensual became coaxing. Coaxing turned to seductive, then finally approached insistence. Unable to resist, I tried rolling myself backward as I sat in the desk chair. The chair casters did not turn smoothly against the carpet, or I might have succeeded in my retreat to God. Only knows what fate the spot had planned for me. As I flexed my legs to overcome the drag of the carpet, my loving yet meddlesome mother came to my rescue. I hadn't answered her previous call, and she hadn't left a message. Her routine in such situations was to wait 10 minutes and call again, using the time to compose an appropriately thoughtful yet guilt-inducing message to leave. The phone chirped loudly in my hand, enough to startle me and cause me to drop it. Luck being on my side for once in my life, it landed screen down. I pulled a slew of papers, coasters, and even a dirty plate off my desk, whatever was within reach, to cover it. The onslaught had ceased in a flash. I spent the rest of that night living like a blind man. I tied a shirt around my head for a blindfold and wore it constantly, not trusting myself to just keep my eyes closed. Somehow, with face recognition and Siri's help, I managed to call and check the hours for the urgent care facility a few blocks away, my plan being to arrive as the doors opened in the morning. After inexplicably getting a few hours sleep, mostly from exhaustion, and having neither eaten nor showered since the previous morning, I found myself contemplating just how best to navigate walking the 6 blocks to the doctor. I couldn't very well walk down the street blindfolded, so I had employed my hoodie idea. With the opening pulled down to just an unnerving few square inches, I ventured out. Other than sideswiping a garbage can and nearly colliding with a couple of emerging coffee shop patrons, my tunnel vision trek was proceeding without any serious issues until I needed to cross the main road. So far, I had only encountered side street intersections, with little to no traffic at this hour, but the medical facility was on the opposite side of the 4-lane. As I waited at the light, head down and listening for the chirping noise that told me it was safe to cross, I reassuringly told myself that I was going to make it, that the doctor would scan my head, prescribe a pill, or send me to some specialist who would know exactly how to cure what ailed me. Having made it this far unscathed, I was feeling just a sliver of optimism as the chirp came, and I stepped into the street. I may have been distracted, or it may have made no difference. I heard a motor racing, just a bit, to my right. Nothing particularly menacing, but enough to draw my attention. Just like answering the phone, I instinctively looked up ever so slightly to assure myself that I wasn't about to be run over. And there it was. A spotlessly clean storefront window, advertising the coming fall fashions. Spotless, that is, except for the spot I had been avoiding. The result was instantaneous. The ethereal chimes and fearsome dragging sounds, the forceful groping fingers upon my chest, urging me backward, and the sight of the ever-growing, surging spot itself, all manifested collectively. Reflected in the glass, the spot now loomed, grown larger than me. Its depths beckoned, its darkness seductive. I stopped, then reversed direction in the crosswalk, shuffling backward toward the maw of the thing that had been pursuing me. I was a part of the reflection this time, and I watched as my fate unfolded behind me. The flashing lights became blue-white arcs, dancing wildly just behind me, reaching out to welcome me or strike me dead, I knew not which, when a delivery truck pulled to the stoplight and blocked the window from my view. Released, I collapsed. Horns blared, onlookers undoubtedly gawked, and a young girl actually stepped up and asked me if I needed help. I ignored them all, abandoning my optimistic hopes for a medical miracle cure. I staggered to my feet, pulled my hoodie strings tighter, and ran. I desperately wanted to run away. But how can you run away from a reflection, from an entity that follows you always? So I ran towards something, or rather, somewhere. I ran blindly to the laundromat. It made no logical sense, but logic had been left far behind sometime yesterday. As I had laid awake last night, my mind had reeled through scenarios, causes, and plans for what had been happening. The doctor had remained as plan A. My plan B made no sense whatsoever, but it flowed forward like a lifeline as I ran. Miraculously, I arrived at the laundromat without being run over or seeing another reflection. The laundromat hadn't opened yet, but that wasn't going to deter me. I pried the painted metal top off a public trash can, and with my eyes closed, beat it against the front window until it shattered. I carefully crawled through and headed for the door in the rear of the building marked Employees Only. It was thankfully unlocked. Once inside, it took little time to find something that would serve my purposes: a large screwdriver and an old toolbox. Back in the laundromat was an array of electrical panels mounted on the back wall, variously marked high voltage, danger 220/208 volts, or just electrical hazard. I had noticed these while gazing idly about the room the day before. Without hesitating to think, I pried the door open on the largest of the panels, held the screwdriver by the metal blade to assure good contact, and jammed it across the incoming leads. And woke up here in the hospital in the psychiatric ward about 2 weeks ago. Guess you know the rest, Doc. I refused to open my eyes until anything reflective was removed from the room, the curtains drawn. Not sure what else I demanded, but I got sedated for it. I do remember. Under the care of your colleagues, though, I'm calmer and less prone to delusions. In just this short time, I've progressed to where I can actually look at myself in a mirror. I don't like to, but I can do it. Well, you do seem to have made incredible progress, Mr. Buchanan. Please, just Jerry. Okay, Jerry. And I did want to apologize again for you getting shuffled about here a bit. We seem to have quite the rash of absenteeism lately. I hope there isn't anything contagious being passed around. Oh, I'm sure you'll get to the bottom of it, Doc, I said, rising and extending my hand. I wanted to thank you and your team again for all you've done. As he reached out to shake my hand, he flinched his own. Oh, got a little shock from you, Jerry. Yeah, that happens. Probably just static.